Hi, my name is Carrie Vaughn. I'm the author of more than 20 novels and a lot of short stories. My most recent release is a novella, The Ghosts of Sherwood, from Tor.com. On August 4th, I will be releasing The Heirs of Locksley, the sequel. All of my in-person readings and events and signings and conventions have been canceled. So to make up for it, I'm doing a reading here from the privacy and safety of my backyard. Before I get started, I'm recording this just a couple of days after the passing of Olivia de Havilland. I dedicated The Ghosts of Sherwood to Errol and Olivia because their portrayals of Robin and Marian in the film The Adventures of Robin Hood was very influential and inspirational for me. So I would just like to recognize Olivia de Havilland and all of her accomplishments and the great inspiration she was to me and many other people. And now, without further ado, a little bit from the Heirs of Locksley. Just a quick note, I'm starting a couple of sections into the story. The background you need to know is this takes place at the second coronation of Henry III. Long story there, lots of problems. You can look up the history if you're interested in that. But at this point, Henry III is 13 years old. And Robin and Marian's children are all teenagers. And yes, they're about to meet for the first time. The king called his barons and knights to swear fealty before the week was out. John half expected his father to change his mind, to deal with the young king himself. But he didn't, so he, Mary, and Eleanor arrived at the grand hall where Henry held court, dressed in their best, and attempting to behave like they knew what they were doing. The place was crowded, thick with the smell of candles and sweat, and everyone looking over everyone else in a calculating way that made John's spine twitch. Who was in favor, who wasn't, and how the balance of power would shift in the years to come. How did one ever learn to read it all? John was now very glad that their mother had been so insistent that they learn French. It was the only language anyone spoke here, except for the occasional Latin. He already felt at a disadvantage not knowing anyone, but at least he understood what they were saying. Mary was also studying the assemblage with a narrowed gaze and thoughtful frown. "Are you still looking for William de Ross?" John asked. She winced unhappily. "Is he here, do you think?" "I don't know why you bother when you don't even know what he looks like." "His family arms are red with water bags on it. Maybe he's wearing his arms." John's brow furrowed. "Heraldic water bags? What does that even look like? No lions or leaping stags or... Never mind." How was it she was the most nervous of them all? It wasn't like she'd actually have to speak to the king. Even Eleanor seemed settled, holding on to Mary's arm and glancing around with wide, interested eyes. A herald called names. Lords approached and knelt before the king. Oaths were exchanged. Each meeting took only a minute or so. John ought to be remembering the names, as he realized he could not recall a single one he'd heard in the last 10 minutes. Lady Marian would say he should mark each one and learn what he could about them, in case he needed the information later. Their mother was much better at court politics than all the rest of them put together. She should be the one here. And then there was only one name before theirs. He squared his shoulders. This would be simple. All would be well. "Here we are. He'll hardly notice us, and this will all be over." "Are you well?" Mary asked their sister, who let go of her hand and clutched her skirt, standing up straight and proper. Her lips were locked in a tight line, but she nodded. All these crowds, all these strangers, she must hate this, but she was being very brave. John tried to smile encouragingly, but she was focused on the way ahead and did not see him. Then it was their turn. "Lord John of Locksley, with Lady Mary and Lady Eleanor," the herald announced. The three siblings stood before King Henry. His chair was too large for him, and he gripped the ends of the arms as if he expected it to tip over. He sat rigidly, with determination. How this must be trying his patience. At his age, John had only wanted to ride and shoot and practice swordplay. Did King Henry ever do anything but sit in chairs and look serious? "My liege," John said, and knelt at the place on the carpet that was scuffed from dozens of other knees. Behind him, he sensed Mary and Eleanor curtsying so deeply they nearly touched the floor. They had spent the morning practicing. He had been paying enough attention to know what would follow. One of the bishops would tell him what he was swearing to, loyalty and tribute and all the rest. John would swear, the king would promise to follow the law and protect his servants, and then it would be over. Instead, a young voice interrupted. "Lord John of Locksley, The king leaned forward in the great chair, curious and demanding. The hall fell silent. Everyone was staring at him. Absolutely everyone. John's heartbeat seemed very loud all of a sudden. "Yes, Your Grace," he said, making his voice clear. His French had an accent that was out of place in this court. He was so obviously English. "Your father is Robin of Locksley?" King Henry asked. Several of his counselors murmured among themselves and looked discomfited. They remembered that name well. "Yes, Your Grace." He rather thought he knew what came next. The question was always the same. "Do you know archery?" Suddenly Henry was very much a boy, not a king. John smiled. He couldn't not. This was familiar ground. He spoke to the boy, not the king. "I do. My father taught me." Henry's eyes lit up. Much murmuring gossip among the courtiers answered this, as he knew it would. Everyone knew the stories about his father. The king had a boyish smile to go with the smooth face and bright eyes. "We should like to see you shoot sometime." John was surprised to note that he also spoke French with an English accent. "At your pleasure, but..." He glanced behind him. His sister would not thank him for this, even if he only spoke the truth. "I do not shoot so well as my sister, Lady Mary. Of all of us, she truly inherited my father's gift." "A lady archer!" Henry exclaimed. "Is it true?" Now all eyes were on Mary, and he could almost see her repressing the urge to throttle him, instead donning her most polite manners. She couldn't be surprised that John threw her forward like this. "My brother flatters me, Your Grace," she said properly, elegantly. "But yes, I do shoot." "You will show us, yes?" "At your pleasure, Your Grace," she answered. Oh, John would catch hell from her later. King Henry had bent the ear of the nearest counselor to him, a middle-aged bishop in a black coat with dark eyes and a glaring manner. The counselor nodded, and then King Henry did. He announced, "We will hold an archery contest, a simple affair, all in fun, on the tournament grounds, tomorrow. We will see you there and anyone of our court who wishes to test themselves against you and see who is the best." "Of course, Your Grace," Mary said, curtsying even lower somehow. King Henry grinned happily. "Sire, the oaths," one of the other bishops put in. They had almost forgotten the business at hand. So, oaths of fealty were exchanged, and finally a steward gestured the three of them away. They left the royal chamber and emerged in the hall outside, where the swarm of courtiers and attendants and hangers-on gathered, with much drinking and eating and talking and watching and scheming, and it was all just noise. Mary stopped and looked heavenward. Eleanor stood between them, grinning. She approved, at least. "Aren't you going to yell at me?" John asked. "Tell me that was the stupidest thing I've ever done, to draw the king's attention like that." Mary started walking again. "On the contrary, I think Mother and Father will be most impressed at how you found a way to curry favor. I'm rather impressed myself." Well, that hadn't been the reason at all. He'd only wanted to see if the boy would smile. "Then you don't mind me throwing you into this?" "I don't mind shooting before the king, but the way everyone stared at me like I'm some kind of a trained dancing bear." "People like dancing bears," he offered. "John, we can't escape Father's reputation. We might as well use it, yes?" "Well then, if we're going to shoot in a contest tomorrow, we'd best hurry home and check our bows." At least she'd stopped searching the crowd for William de Ross. All right. You can't have a Robin Hood story without an archery contest. I think that's a rule somewhere. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to know more about me and my writing, you can check out my website at www.carrievaughn.com. And other than that, The Heirs of Locksley comes out in just a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.